Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our latest webinar episode. Today, we're going to be looking at how you can unlock hidden capacity throughout your NHS estates, ideally without having to access capital projects. This is the second episode we're hosting in our Future Workplace of the NHS series, in which we're looking at how utilisation data and occupancy data can be greatly beneficial across NHS trusts when making design plans, optimisation, across spaces and helping teams meet their net zero goals. My name's David Thomas, and I'll be the host for today's session, and I'll be joined by the Open Census CEO and founder, Judith Standen, and our head of project, Vu Nguyen. Today, we're going to be looking primarily at how you can start to build a kind of evidence-based structure and understanding of what's going on with your spaces, and then how you can use this data to identify opportunities for optimization and consolidation throughout your portfolios. And we're going to be kind of driving these discussions by bearing in mind spend and net zero targets. For a bit of context as to why we've kind of chosen to dial down and focus on this topic, we have over the last few years been working alongside more and more trusts who have a number of problems centered around their space and its utilization, how people are accessing it, how much they're spending, and primarily just a lack of understanding as to what is going on throughout their trusts. But there is significant budget attached to these trusts and their real estate. It's estimated that up to £1.27 billion of savings are on the table at the moment, just through optimizing lease terms and actually like looking at who's working where. So without further ado, we may as well dive into the actual meat of the webinar. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Judith, who will discuss how we begin to look at some of these projects with vast and varied spaces spread out over a large area.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to maybe firstly introduce a framework that we pulled together after about 10 years of working with sensors, utilization data, and really people trying to make different types of changes. We call it like the MMT Framework. It's measure, model, and transform. And it really gives what we see naturally happen, and also kind of focusing on outcomes, a structured way to tackle some of these quite complex challenges. The first part is measure is really kind of get situational awareness, establish your utilization data, get a handle on understanding what is happening within the spaces that you are focusing on. The second step, then you can take that information and model. So you can say, you can do scenario modeling, you can look at different trade-offs and so on before moving into the change management transform, which is kind of the last step, but it's an iterative step. And within transform, you do your changes, you validate them, you scale, and then you go back to measure down the line, and then see the effectiveness of your changes and kind of repeat as you go along. And I think this gives, at least for people that are coming into doing this kind of massive workplace changes, at least it gives you some sort of framework to take from one step to the next.
Thank you for that. Is it worth kind of touching on, or could you expand a little bit on the benefits that this model, which may use, I guess, fewer sensors than traditional approaches, like the benefits that could have to NHS in terms of budgets and project planning?
I think, especially with the NHS, but for most people, with sensors and capital expenditure and so on, it's better to start targeted and small. A, it's cost effective, but B, it also keeps the scope of the projects tight and focus on deliverables. I think that, like, for most consolidation projects and so on, like, having the most amount of sensors isn't going to be what's going to make you effective. It's about pulling together a more methodical approach to your change management process.
Yeah, that's great. And we've actually got an example of that coming up next, with looking at kind of like how to apply this MMT model in specific challenges we're seeing. So, Vu, if you could look at how we kind of apply this to repurposing spaces, that'd be really handy.
Yeah, so I'll give you specific examples. We have been talking to quite a few different trusts, and one particular example come to mind. So the people who work at this couple hospital, they understand that there is underutilization in the administration spaces versus clinical when they are quite busy. So the idea is, they know it, but they don't have the data to back it and to make changes. But the idea is they want to try to convert some of the administrative spaces into clinical spaces, but without the data, they cannot do it. So what we suggest, using the framework that Judith mentioned above, we start out a small deployment, measure one particular department. That could be one floor, one department, even one entire hospital. Do a rolling study for a few months. The reason we're suggesting that we do a shorter term is that the obvious thing will jump out immediately. You don't need the entire year of data to see that. So what we call the low-hanging fruits. After you identify those spaces, then you can start going through the modeling phase, as Judith mentioned. Decided, okay, these spaces, they are severely underutilized. Should I convert them directly? Maybe I can make them a hoteling space, or maybe I can, adjust person to desk ratio and so on. And then after that, right, you can start making changes and then move the sensors to another location to measure while the first place is going through the changes. So that's kind of safe on the deployment cost, but also make it very flexible. You can constantly change in different places where you want to measure and act on that.
Awesome. And just as well, you mentioned at the beginning there that this is a challenge that people know and can observe. Could you expand a little bit on potentially kind of what data sources people might already be looking at, and kind of what the gaps there are, and how sensor data fills that?
Yeah, so traditionally, there are quite a few ways to look at the data. Sometimes people use badges, but that means, just like if people come into the building or not, they don't know inside the building what people do. Sometimes people do a short-term survey, like somebody walking by using an iPad and note, but then it's too short and it's only, reflective of one particular period of time. And then once you make changes, you don't know what's going on. And sometimes just through observations, right? It's like facility managers who work inside a building, they would notice it, and like the behavior. If there's particular spaces that are underutilized, you can see it consistently. But without the actual factual data, you cannot. Usually, it's hard to go and convince the stakeholders to adjust to make any changes.
Awesome, thanks, Vu. And yeah, that's when it's looking at a problem that we kind of people know about and is, as you said, observable. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how we would apply the MMT model in a scenario where people really don't have much idea what's going on? They just know that it's inefficient.
Yes, and it's pretty normal for leaders to not have an awareness of what's going on in their states. There's generic, I suppose, utilization kind of data published saying things like 60% of space is underutilized across the NHS trusts, but you don't know where that is, what the kind of, is that an average through very busy clinical spaces, whilst the use case Vu talked about are the admin spaces super underutilized. If you don't know, then it has to start with trying to get a macro view. So as Vu mentioned before, like, there's other sources of data, that can probably at least give you some level of macro view, but others, for instance, one client has decided to use footfall sensors to get, rather than kind of getting granular sensors early, they deployed footfall sensors in order to get an understanding across kind of hallways and so on, like the footfall across neighborhoods. And then they're able to use that data to see which are kind of the low-hanging fruits, as it were, and focus in on a on a micro level. So that, I think, is a really interesting way, because I think you need to get some semblance of direction, at which it clearly gives you.
Awesome. And so when we talk about these kind of like micro, I've done it now, macro to micro approaches, we're obviously looking at a tool that's going to be repurposed quite a lot. Can you mention a bit about the kind of way that we've built the solution to facilitate that in terms of like repurposing and multifunctional sensors? I guess it might be useful to give a bit of context about how we actually work within a space, in terms of hardware and stuff.
Sure. So the way we work is we have a number of different types of sensors. We try to use sensors that are kind of for the space, rather than just kind of trying to get one hardware to do the same thing. What's really helped has been that all our sensors, both counters and PIRs, all types, are now battery based. So in a sense, it makes it very much lightweight and remote. So we go into a space, deploy, like I said, a combination of different types of sensors off the kind of the human network, and after, let's say, 3 months, you can take that and move the sensors to another neighborhood, whilst the work of kind of modeling and the change management is being done for the previous. So in a sense, kind of the infrastructure is set up so that this rolling within the framework, a rolling period appears.
Yeah, thank you. I think a bit more, that'll probably be quite useful context for what Vu's about to take us through, with a bit more of an in-depth look at some metrics for a key example of this model in action.
Yeah, so as Yodit mentioned, the battery-based sensors make it much easier to move around. We don't have to worry about electrical output, so making the 3 months rolling studies very easy, and deployment costs really low for these kind of things. So I'm going to go into a more specific example of one of our existing clients. So it is a university hospital, and they have quite a few different buildings. One example that is a very quick cost saving is that they deploy a footfall sensor into one of the buildings they are renting. They paid about $750K a year for those, and after just the first month, they noticed that only 3 people are regularly using that particular building. I know it's ridiculous, but it is what it is. So they, remove it, kind of remove the lease, and kind of immediately receive immediate cost savings. And then for the rest of them, there's quite few departments. The space is for like about 5,000 people. So they start with about 1,000 sensors, but rolling into multiple different departments. We have multiple different phases with them. So for one, I'm going to go to one particular example, one particular department in this case. But the idea is that choose one department. After you do the footfall sensor, you know which departments are or floors are problematic. So you focus, you zoom in, start deploying counters for meeting rooms and specific top-down sensors to measure workbenches, and that way you can get more detailed data. So what they also do is that they create a mandate. If one particular department decide to make adjustment or complain that they don't have enough space, they have to go to a study first for 3 months. Afterward, combine with the data and ask from the department head, they decide what to do. So I'm going to go to this example. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a floor plan of a pathology department within the hospital. It is a small office, but it's a very good example of how changes go about in this space. We're looking at the floor plan. The green dots mean those workstations are underutilized. Between 0 to 15% is what we consider underutilizations, and anything above 45 is what we call overutilizations. So the ideal range is between the 45. The reason that it is low, like 45 is already considered overutilization, is that the sensor measure actual utilization. Like if somebody is sitting there, but they go to the bathroom or they go to the meetings, the desk is empty. So it's become more specific. So at that point, even 45% utilization is already considered full utilization. And you can see immediately on the top half of the floor plan, there's quite a few spots that are underutilized. And it's a very common pattern we see across different clients that we have. They're like pockets of desk or workstation or offices that tend to be underutilized, while the other areas is very overutilized. So let's look at the next slide. After identifying where they are on the floor, we look at the patterns of usage, and it's become immediately clear that on the left side are the kind of distribution of spaces that are underutilized between 0 to 15%. And in this department, you have like 9 offices like that. And on the other side, on the right side, there's about 12 of them that are utilized properly or overutilized. Those are the ones you don't really want to touch. But here you can identify the low-hanging fruit immediately. Like those 9 offices are the one that you can look into and start modeling and decide what to use. And here is another thing too. I want to go into more details. So 0 to 5% means the office is completely empty. It's like nobody's using it. It's completely unused. 5 to 15% is the offices that are utilized but very slightly. That usually means somebody owned the office. It's 1-to-1 person to desk ratio. It's like assigned office, but then that person is coming in only at 2-3 days a month, so it's barely used. So in the first case, obviously you can just take those space back and assign it to somebody else or change the way it's being used. But in the second case, usually what people do is that they either create a share office, so people with different schedule can actually use the same office, or they can convert those offices into hoteling space where more people can use the same space over time and increase the person to desk ratio.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Vu. Just before we carry on with it, I'm going to talk through a third way to look at the same space essentially, and that's by looking at the square foot implications of these utilization data points. What we can do within our system, and what we really highly recommend our clients do with us, is look at kind of square footage per desk allocation, per square footage per room allocation, so we can then start to actually quantify how much space is being either used or not used on a very basic level on the back of this utilization data. And when you know this kind of like square footage utilization, you can then tie it to your cost per square foot or your green goals per square foot, and it brings the data into light in a very real sense in terms of kind of overarching priorities and goals within the organization. So you can see on the chart in front of you significant amounts of utilization of square footage is 15% utilized or lower. So that's clearly just essentially power that's being used for no one and money being spent for no one. So it really highlights the challenges or the scale of the challenges an organization can be facing. And it's kind of data points like these, or cross-referencing data points like these, which really assist with building momentum internally, when you can kind of take observable trends in what's going on to the office and then turn it into monthly ROI reports or costs or kind of like green impact analyses. It makes everything far more tangible, and it's a really useful way of looking at the data beyond the kind of human aspect of it, especially when you start to consider just how much kind of money and carbon is going into powering, say, an NHS estate throughout the year. So yeah, just wanted to quickly touch on that one before we went back to looking at the kind of behaviour-based side of things. So back to you, Vu.
So what we're looking here, so as David mentioned, there are multiple ways to look at the same set of data, and from the way you look at the data, different decision might come out. What we're looking at here is the behavioral pattern, how people are using the space. So people can come in, there are different behaviors we are trying to detect. One way is that somebody's coming in, but only on a hybrid time base, maybe a couple of days a week, versus somebody's coming in, but then use the desk in shift. So it could be they could be coming in 5 days a week, but only in the morning, and somebody else working in the evening. And then there are certain places where, certain behavior where people are actually consistently using the offices, but they have meetings, so they jam out for a couple hours here and there, and so. And then there's behavior when the desk is completely utilized the entire day, when somebody is just consistently sitting at that. We detect those behaviors and separate them. So what we're looking at in this chart, on the left side, we have, this is the same department we talked about before. There are 8 spaces that are unused completely. That means they are utilized less than 15% of the time. So those are the low-hanging fruits that we're talking about. You can start making decisions about those immediately. And what's more interesting is the mobile space and the semi-mobile space. So mobile space, just as I mentioned, is somebody coming in and work only a couple of days a week. Those are the places that you can increase the person to desk ratio. So if you convert those into hybrid spaces, then instead of 1 person per desk, you can increase them to 2 and sometimes up to 3, depends on the data for that particular areas. Semi-mobile is slightly different. Like it could be, what you can do there is maybe having 2 people sharing the same office. If somebody's coming in the morning on Monday, Tuesday, then somebody else can come in the same days, but in the evening, and then vice versa. So there are multiple different kind of decisions on how you, of what you can do, depending on the behavior of the particular area.
Awesome. Thank you for the in-depth kind of view there of how we approach these topics and projects. Just to finish up with them, do you want to take us through, I guess, kind of your key points to consider in the MMT process, Yoda, and how or what advice you'd give to people to kind of keep front and center in their minds if they're thinking about starting a project like this in their own spaces?
Thanks, David. If they could take away that there is actually a framework and there is ways for everyone to really lower the risks and lower the costs of these change programs, and really start small, find the easy wins early on, build your evidence, test your theories, but also kind of understand, get confidence within your teams about the change process, and keep iterating. There's no one answer, but usually this guides you towards the optimum way. And what you're really trying to understand is what's optimum for my workplace. Obviously, there's averages all over, but for industry and so on. But what is correct for us, and what is correct for even how aggressive can we be for a particular department on person to death ratios, you can really kind of, if you tie it all together, it's much easier to create the types of spaces that, you know, people want to work in, but also are effective and well used.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Yoda and Vu, and everybody for listening. We will be back in about a month's time with episode 3, so please do check in on the website to sign up, and also for all previous recordings of our sessions. And also, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or would like to see how we could potentially take a look at your spaces and help you out. Thank you very much and have great days. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.